Tranche 2, Phase 2. We've been listening to even more evidence from Andy Coles. We discovered that this might be the last day of evidence. It feels like tomorrow might not be happening. Andy Coles has been questioning a whole bunch of stuff this afternoon, but one of the most notable things is his authorship of the Tradecraft Manual. People might remember the Tradecraft Manual was the first document to be released by the Undercover Policing Inquiry. There was a very good episode of the Spycops Info podcast about it, years ago now. David Barr went through it line by line. I mean, there was a particularly ridiculous section where he got to the sexual liaison section, and Andy Coles tried to pretend that it wasn't about sex. It was quite laughable, really. Heather Mendick has just come alongside me. What did you make of this afternoon's evidence?
Yeah, it was... I think the brazenness of his lies is what's really throwing me. It's like, he's shown this thing that's like, well, you know, if this is sexual liaisons, it might become necessary to have a relationship. If you do, make sure it's fleeting and disastrous. Yep. He seems to have followed his own advice, mostly. Maybe not fleeting, but it's disastrous. And then he insists over and over again, like you say, it's not sexual. Even when he's asked, could it be read that way? He insists, he almost tries to insist it couldn't.
It was just, it was so laughable. I mean, Barr is even at the point where he goes, look, are you saying it wouldn't be possible for anybody to think that? And he's like, well, it's not what I meant. And it's like, it's so obvious that's what he meant.
Yeah, and then you get evidence from two other undercover officers who say that he advised them, not just that if necessary, but that it's actually inevitable, you'll have to have a sexual relationship.
Mark Jenner and Jim Boyling, both of whom said that he advised them to have the sexual relationships were inevitable, and they had to make a choice whether they wanted to blow their own cover or to have sexual relationships. We were also shown that HN1 had said that not only was
so HN1's Matt Rayner.
Matt Rayner, cover name Matt Rayner, which he stole from a dead child. That not only was Andy Coles aware of his relationship with Liz Fuller, but that also that he was aware of his relationship with Jessica.
Yes, and that he was aware that Matt Rayner was aware that Andy Coles had a reputation as a lech.
Yes, and spoke to him about it.
Yes,
which Andy Coles denies, says doesn't remember. What's weird is a lot of the stuff about the sort of the advice and the stuff in his debrief, not his debrief document, that doesn't mention it at all, but elsewhere, he accepts it. He was like, it is inevitable. It's inevitable. Oh yeah, of course it's inevitable.
But it wasn't inevitable for him.
No,
apparently he managed to completely avoid it. Even though men, or at least one man, and at least 3 women, threw themselves.
Oh, well, he directly contradicts the evidence of 6 witnesses.
Yes, and he also says that women were making advances to him. I think he has this it's a projection, right? A lot of this stuff is projection. So he has this idea that all these women in the animals' rights movement, they have no kind of traditional norms of relationships. They're just all out for sex all the time. Going to be very dominant. And in fact, he's the one who's doing all of this stuff. He's the one who's all out for sex all the time. He's the one who has no norms of kind of he used the word courtship, doesn't he? He hasn't had the word courtship in I don't know how long.
It's so weird.
It's so weird. Yeah, and he's breaking those all the time. He's the one he's all the time there putting onto other people exactly what they're doing. It's exactly what we saw with what's his name, Bob Lambert.
Oh
It's all projection, and it's very disturbing.
Yeah, it's incredibly disturbing. He really he exposes his own internal thinking quite often. There's definitely like an othering going on of activists. So he kind of just suggests basically aren't full human beings almost. It's really disturbing. I think that the Tradecraft Manual is really a smoking gun. It's not just about the sexual relations, but also about misleading the court.
Yeah.
He pretty much admitted earlier to being part of a conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. He says both in the Tradecraft Manual and also in his debrief document, where it's much stronger, that they should be allowed to mislead the court. It's ridiculous that they're not allowed to mislead the court. Come on, let's not be squeamish about it. Government ministers mislead courts all the time.
Yes, that's really interesting, because I watched The Morning on the live feed, not on this, and there is that bit where he doesn't even seem to understand why David Barr is having a problem with what he did. He's like, we did this, and David Barr's like, this is a kind of criminal conspiracy. And there's something in him that he must have been trained. He must have been trained what's right and wrong. But he seems to have completely rejected it. It's a bit like with Trevor Morris. That he has issues. I guess it wasn't very nice to be an undercover officer in some ways.
It seems like a great time.
Well, Good point. But there must have been some kind of issues these people are carrying with them, that they've got resentment against some of their bosses. And it's playing out, and against sometimes against each other. And it's playing out in some ways, particularly when Matt Rayner and he were undercover at the same time. And there was another time Bob Lambert was always blaming
Mike Chitty.
Yes.
I mean, we saw that document about the dangers of Mike Chitty. That Mike Chitty supposedly was trying to contact Andy Coles to warn him about something. I mean, it's interesting that Coles claimed he had no knowledge of any of the undercover officers having sexual relations, apart from Mike Chitty. Oh, he was aware of that one. Because basically, I mean, it seems that there's like an omerata about within these officers, you know, that like you back each other up, and if someone falls foul of it, well, you can chuck them under a bus. And Mike Chitty is very much. It's a real shame that Mike Chitty, who now lives in France, has refused to appear at the inquiry.
Yes, he'd be very interested.
You know, you might actually get some. I mean, at least he'd be willing to throw the others under a bus, because they're all willing to throw him under a bus, right?
Yes.
So I mean, I think that, that'll be interesting. That would have been interesting. And sadly, it won't be happening. Not at this inquiry, anyway.
Well, yes. No, it is. It's like these tensions between officers that we've seen. We've seen much more now, I think, because there was obviously it was getting very extreme in that unit in a way it hadn't in earlier phases. The behaviour was getting more out of control. There were more than one officer in the same area at the same time, and they were clearly getting on each other's nerves. And there's a moment where David Barr says, you only had one other person you're leaving to, and Matt Rayner had a really big leaving to. This is just the end of the morning evidence. And clearly there was that kind of, you know, how popular you were probably was an issue, how much intelligence you were getting.
Well, I mean, you know, part of their deployment was a popularity contest, right? It was like you get close to lots of people, and it's very clear that Coles did not get close to lots of people, so was forced into making up evidence or setting up his own projects which created the evidence.
And there must have been a competition not just in terms of the intelligence you got, but in terms of the sexual relationships. I can't believe they didn't talk about this and boast about it as a thing. You know,
I mean, it seems very much like, you know, Bob Lambert, John Dine's got to have sex with attractive young women. I'm going to find myself some young women, and I deserve some. And I'm going to find some. But if that means I have to go and knock on their doors at 10 o'clock at night and stick my tongue down their throat to get there, that's what I'm going to do. It's gross. It's really gross.
It really is pretty gross,
I mean, I do find myself talking about some really gross stuff when we're covering this, and you do feel quite dirty sometimes after talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, David Barr has to really ask some very unpleasant, awkward questions sometimes. And he actually managed it reasonably well without coming over as, you know, a man asking these questions to another man that can come over as a bit almost kind of laddish. And he kind of manages to pull back from that. Occasionally he gets to moments where he gets close to it.
I mean, he does.
But he does pull back from it.
I get the impression that's some sort of tactic of some sort, you know, with the questioning. It's hard to tell. But we're on a short break. We should go back in. Thanks for joining us. I'll do a recap at the end of the day. It looks like it's going to be the last day of evidence before Christmas, which is very exciting.
Yes, it is.
If that is the case, I won't do a Twitter Spaces tonight. I'll do it tomorrow, just so I can go to the pub later. Right, cheers, guys. I'll see you later.
Bye. Yeah.